Well, being a little girl, it was, I was frightened, I was scared, and we had to get out of the way. And there were airplanes flying in the sky that seemed to have been dropping something down to the houses and setting them on fire.
On May 31st into June 1st of 1921, white mobs gathered in the all-black Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Here, they killed over 300 black residents, left over 9,000 homeless, and burned 1,200 buildings and homes. Known as the Tulsa Race Massacre, this event is one of the worst acts of racial violence that America has ever seen. In under 24 hours, much of the Greenwood district was nothing more than char and ashes. In those ashes, however, lay the story of what Greenwood had been, and this story was one of hope, one of grit, and one of wealth, immense wealth. This is the story of Black Wall Street. Our story begins in the 1830s, in the southeast states of America, with the Trail of Tears. Here, an estimated 100,000 Native Americans were forced to relocate to the so-called Indian Territory, or modern-day Oklahoma. These Native Americans were from the 5 civilized tribes which had adopted European practices such as European clothing, Christianity, and owning black slaves. Thousands of black slaves were forced to accompany their Native American slaveholders to the Indian Territory. After the Civil War, the slaves were freed by the Native Americans, and following the General Allotment Act of 1887, which granted land to the individual tribe members, the freedmen, former slaves, were also given land. By 1907, there were over 23,000 land allotments for the freedmen. At around the same time, an influx of black Americans reached Oklahoma and Kansas, in search of a place where they could prosper without the threat of violence. Known as the Exodusters, they were prompted by the Compromise of 1877, which removed troops from the South, leaving whites to mistreat blacks once again. By 1920, there were over 50 African American towns in Oklahoma. One prominent Exoduster, E.P. McCabe, claimed Oklahoma was the paradise of Eden and the garden of the gods. In 1889, Congress passed the Indian Appropriations Act, which allowed Americans to stake claims for plots of land in the unassigned lands of the Indian Territory. So, at noon of April 22nd of 1889, 50,000 people rushed into the unassigned lands to stake their claims and own land in Oklahoma. Though historians disagree on the number of black Americans involved in the land rush of 1889, it is a fact that many did indeed participate. Among these black settlers was O.W. Gurley, a young, ambitious entrepreneur. Gurley staked his claim near the town of Perry, and so began his life in Oklahoma. Gurley became the principal of the city schools of Perry, and later opened a general store in the town, doing well for himself and his family. In 1901, oil was discovered in Red Fork, a town in southwest Tulsa, bringing national attention to the area. Then, in 1905, an even larger oil well was discovered in Glenpool, another town in Tulsa. After this discovery, Gurley saw the economic opportunity that Tulsa's oil would bring, and in the same year, he bought 40 acres of land in North Tulsa. Gurley, with the help of J.B. Stratford, another black businessman, then began to sell the land under one caveat: only black Americans could buy it. Thus, Greenwood began, one of the first, most successful districts of black Americans, by black Americans, and for black Americans. In 1907, Oklahoma became a state. The very first bill that the state legislature passed was one that established segregation in public transportation. In the years to follow, Oklahoma passed many more Jim Crow laws that limited where African Americans could live and shop. As a result, the growing Greenwood district was forcefully sequestered away from the white districts of Tulsa. On the surface, this may seem like it would have killed the business and economy of the Greenwood district. Instead, it did the opposite.
It's ironic that a set of laws that were put into place, which were to perpetuate this idea of white supremacy over any minority, then causes that minority to become secluded, even exclusive, as you will, and then they truly prosper because they are, as a community, supporting one another.
The segregationist laws in Oklahoma forced the black citizens of Greenwood to become self-sufficient. Because many of the blacks that came to Oklahoma did so on the promise of a place where they could prosper in safety, they did not let Jim Crow kill their dream. Instead, they built their own businesses and supported each other. And as more people moved into Tulsa due to the oil boom, Greenwood got richer and richer. By 1921, Greenwood had 108 businesses, including grocery and meat markets, restaurants, boarding houses, hotels, dentist offices, pharmacies, insurance agencies, and even a movie theater. At its prime, Greenwood was 35 blocks of land that exemplified black excellence and true financial success, something that many black Americans at the time did not have. Many blacks in America found Jim Crow to push them into poverty, but Greenwood served as an example of what could happen when they supported each other and adopted a mentality of hope.
It's a place that African Americans all over the country are thinking about, are reading about. It's really a place that people think of as like, I want to go there to make something of myself, to settle.
At a time when many black people were seen as inferior in the eyes of whites, Greenwood was a testament to the fact that black folks, many of whom were a mere generation away from slavery, could become successful, even under Jim Crow.
You could actually pull yourself up by your bootstrings, like the old American saying, like that you really could come from nothing, as most African Americans did out of slavery, and become wealthy.
Greenwood became one of the most prosperous all-black towns in America, leading it to be nicknamed as Black Wall Street. However, it's important to note that while Greenwood was extremely successful, there were also many other successful all-black towns that thrived under Jim Crow using the principle of self-sufficiency. These so-called Black Wall Streets thus became a financial frontier for many African Americans. Racial tensions in America arose throughout the early 20th century, but the summer of 1919 marked a new climax as many states across the country, including Illinois, Texas, and Oklahoma, saw massive race riots and many lynchings. Thus, as Greenwood prospered throughout this era, jealousy brewed in the white Tulsans. All they needed now was a single spark. That spark came on May 30th of 1921, when Dick Rowland, a black shoeshiner from Greenwood, hopped on the elevator of a building near his workplace in order to use the restroom. Though no one knows for certain what happened in the elevator, most historians believe that he simply tripped and clutched the arm of the white elevator operator, causing her to scream and causing Rowland to run out. By the next day, white mobs gathered around the jailhouse where he was kept and planned to lynch him. In response, many men from Greenwood came armed, ready to protect Rowland. As tensions rose, a shot was fired and fighting ensued. The white mob completely outnumbered the black defenders, and in a matter of 16 hours, they completely destroyed the district, shooting men, women, and children alike, and burning houses and buildings.
Everything was lost. Everything. When I look at those photographs, it's just a few burnt trees that are still standing.
In the face of a barrier so forceful as the Jim Crow era, the Greenwood district pushed through and reached an economic frontier that many African Americans had never seen before. But that frontier did not disappear after the district was destroyed. Instead, it serves as an eternal reminder to everyone that in times of oppression, supporting one another is the key to success.